Single dad noticed a disabled CEO couldn't reach her table at a crowded food court. What he did made her go silent. What could a single father have done in that crowded moment to leave her completely speechless? And why did such a simple encounter carry enough weight to make her go silent? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Before we continue, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the heartfelt stories we share here. Thank you sincerely for watching, supporting, and being part of this growing community. We're truly grateful to have you with us. And before we start, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it where you are right now? Now, let's begin today's story. Sir, don't touch that table. The warning cut through the lunchtime roar, but Calder Hayes already had one hand on the chair blocking the narrow aisle. Around him, the crowded food court kept moving beneath bright fluorescent lights. Trays clattered, soda machines hissed, sneakers squeaked against polished tile, and conversations blended into one restless wall of sound. Yet Calder had noticed what nearly everyone else had somehow missed. A woman in a wheelchair sat less than 15 feet from an empty table, a lunch tray balanced carefully across her lap, unable to reach it because shopping bags, chairs, and careless bodies had turned the aisle into an obstacle course. "Can't you just go around?" a man muttered without looking up from his phone. The woman's jaw tightened. "There is no around." Nobody moved. Calder looked at his 9-year-old daughter, Tessa, who sat beside their half-finished lunch watching the scene with troubled eyes. Then he looked back at the woman. She was perhaps in her mid-30s, dressed simply but sharply, with composed gray eyes and the kind of posture that suggested she had spent years refusing to let strangers decide what she could or could not do. Calder didn't know her name. He didn't know she was Maren Whitlock, chief executive of one of the largest urban development companies in the region. In that moment, none of that mattered. He stepped closer, stopping several feet away so he wouldn't crowd her. "Would moving the table help?" he asked. Maren looked up. The question seemed to catch her off guard. "Not can I push you? Not do you need someone to help you?" Just a question that left the decision where it belonged, with her. She glanced toward the blocked aisle, then back at him. "Yes," she said quietly. "It would." Calder nodded once. "All right." He returned to his own table. "Dad," Tessa whispered. "Grab your lemonade, kiddo." "Are we leaving?" "Not yet." Calder lifted their tray while Tessa collected her drink and napkins. Then he moved their chairs aside and carefully shifted their table several feet into an open space near Maren, creating a clear path wide enough for her wheelchair. A mall employee hurried over. "Sir, those tables are supposed to stay in their assigned area." Calder stopped. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. "Then assign this one somewhere she can use it." The employee opened his mouth, but no answer came. Calder adjusted the final chair, stepped back, and looked toward Maren. That worked. She rolled forward easily, stopping beneath the table without squeezing past anyone or asking another stranger to move. "Yes," she said. "Thank you." Calder gave a small nod and turned toward Tessa. There were no open tables left now. "Guess we're eating standing up." Tessa smiled and lifted her lemonade. "I've done harder things." Calder laughed softly. Behind them, Maren stared at the father and daughter beside the railing, eating their lunch without complaint. Dozens of people had noticed her wheelchair. One man had noticed her dignity. And for the first time that afternoon, Maren Whitlock had nothing to say. "Wait." Maren's voice stopped Calder just as he reached for Tessa's empty cup. He turned, expecting her to ask him to move another chair, but instead she was holding out a $20 bill. "At least let me buy your lunch." Calder glanced at the money, then at the half-eaten sandwiches on the tray beside his daughter. "We already bought lunch." Maren almost smiled. "Then let me replace the table you gave up. It was not mine to begin with." "You know what I mean." "I do." He gently shook his head. "Keep it." For a moment, Maren simply studied him. Around them, the food court had already returned to its ordinary rhythm. Ice rattled inside plastic cups. A blender whined behind a smoothie counter. Somewhere near the escalators, a toddler laughed. The moment that had felt enormous to Maren barely seemed to exist for anyone else anymore. "Why?" she asked. Calder frowned slightly. "Why what? Why did you help me?" Tessa looked from Maren to her father, suddenly interested in his answer. Calder rested one hand against the railing. Because you needed room. That is not what I asked. It is the answer. Maren's expression tightened, not with anger, but with something more guarded. Most people either pretend not to notice me or rush over and start grabbing my chair without asking. You did neither. Calder was quiet for a beat. He looked across the crowded tables, where people were eating, scrolling through phones, checking watches, living inside their own small emergencies. Then his eyes returned to hers. Everyone kept looking at your chair, he said. Nobody looked at you. Maren went still. Tessa lowered her lemonade. Calder did not seem to realize what his words had done. There was no pride in his face, no expectation of gratitude. He had spoken as plainly as if he were explaining why rain made sidewalks wet. Maren had spent years inside conference rooms where executives praised inclusion and polished presentations. She had attended charity dinners where strangers called her inspiring before learning anything about her. She had heard compliments that felt like sympathy and sympathy disguised as respect. But this man had asked one question, moved one table, and somehow understood the distinction others kept missing. Dad, Tessa said softly, tapping her wrist even though she was not wearing a watch. Calder checked his phone. Oh no, we have 12 minutes. Mrs. Darnell said 10 minutes late is still late. Mrs. Darnell is unfortunately correct. Tessa grinned. Calder gathered their tray. Maren watched them prepare to leave. I did not get your name. Calder. He nodded toward his daughter. And this is Tessa. I am Maren. Nice meeting you, Maren. No recognition crossed his face. No sudden change in posture. No question about Whitlock urban development. Nothing. To Calder Hayes, she was simply Maren. Tessa gave her a small wave. Bye. I hope you like the table. Maren smiled. I think I will remember it. Calder and Tessa disappeared into the Saturday crowd, moving toward the parking garage as quickly as a father carrying 2 drinks and a backpack could manage. Maren remained where she was, staring at the space they had left behind. Her lunch had gone cold. She barely noticed. On Monday morning, hundreds of employees would call her chief executive officer. Investors would measure her decisions in millions of dollars. But that afternoon, a stranger had given her something money had never been able to guarantee. Respect without performance. Kindness without an audience. And Maren sat quietly beside the table, repeating his words in her mind long after he was gone. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray sky that made the city look unfinished. Calder Hayes had been awake since 5:30, packing Tessa's lunch, checking her math worksheet, and drinking coffee that had gone cold before he remembered it existed. By 8:15, he had dropped her at school and was driving his aging white service van toward downtown, where Hayes Mechanical had been assigned an emergency ventilation inspection at a newly renovated office tower. Work was work. Calder never complained about the address. He parked near the loading entrance, pulled his toolbox from the back, and followed a facilities supervisor through a corridor that smelled of fresh paint and new carpet. Executive floors are running warm again, the supervisor said. 3rd complaint this month. Calder glanced toward the ceiling vents. Then somebody keeps treating the symptom. Meaning air does not care what the computer says. The supervisor chuckled. You always this cheerful? Only on Mondays. They entered the main lobby, and Calder slowed. 20 feet above the reception desk, a digital display rotated through company announcements beneath a silver logo, Whitlock Urban Development. Then a photograph appeared. Maren. The same composed gray eyes. The same calm expression. But here she wore a tailored navy jacket, seated before a glass conference table beneath the words Maren Whitlock, Chief Executive Officer. Calder stared for 2 seconds. You know her? The supervisor asked. Met her Saturday. The man stopped walking. You met Maren Whitlock? Apparently. Calder adjusted his toolbox and kept moving. What unsettled him was not that Maren was wealthy. It was the name beneath the company logo. Whitlock Urban Development owned shopping centers, apartment complexes, office towers, and redevelopment projects across several states. Calder had repaired equipment in enough of their properties to recognize the brand. His phone buzzed with a work order update. He opened it, then stopped again. The address listed beneath property ownership was the same shopping center where he and Tessa had eaten 2 days earlier. Calder looked back at Maren's photograph. Something about that realization felt wrong in a way he could not yet name. The elevator chimed. When the doors opened on the 24th floor, quiet replaced the mechanical noise below. Sunlight stretched across pale stone floors. Assistants moved between glass offices carrying tablets and coffee. Calder followed the supervisor toward a utility room until a familiar voice reached him from across the corridor. Calder. He turned. Maren sat near the entrance to a conference room, one hand resting lightly on the wheel of her chair. For the first time since Saturday, surprise broke through her practiced composure. Maren. A man beside her glanced at Calder's work shirt, then at the toolbox. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. You two know each other? He asked. Maren's eyes remained on Calder. We met this weekend. At one of our properties, Calder added. The man extended a hand with polished efficiency. Grant Bellamy, Chief Operating Officer. Calder shook it once. Calder Hayes. Grant looked between them. Interesting coincidence. Calder heard the word beneath the word. Suspicion. Maren heard it too. He is here because facilities called him, she said. Grant smiled. Of course. Calder could have explained. He could have told them he had not known Maren's last name, her company, or the value of anything she owned. Instead, he lifted his toolbox slightly. Where is the air handler? The facilities supervisor pointed down the hall. Calder nodded and walked away. Maren watched him go, but Grant leaned closer. You should be careful. About what? People notice opportunities. Maren looked toward the corridor where Calder had disappeared. Then she remembered a crowded food court, a $20 bill he would not take, and a father willing to eat standing beside a railing rather than make kindness into a transaction. Her voice became quiet. Yes, Grant, she said. They do. Mr. Hayes, how much would it cost for you to forget what happened Saturday? Grant Bellamy asked the question so casually that Calder almost thought he had misunderstood him. They were standing inside a glass conference room on the 24th floor, where the low hum of the ventilation system competed with distant traffic far below. Calder had finished tracing the airflow problem 20 minutes earlier. A control damper had been installed incorrectly during the renovation, forcing the system to compensate until several executive offices became uncomfortably warm. It was not dramatic. Most real problems were not. They began small, stayed unnoticed, and became expensive because somebody important had decided looking correct mattered more than being correct. Calder placed his inspection notes on the table. Forget what? Grant leaned back. The food court. Maren sat several feet away, her expression sharpening. Grant, I am protecting the company. From a man moving a table? She asked. Grant ignored the question. That shopping center belongs to us. If someone decided to characterize the situation as an accessibility failure, it could become inconvenient. Calder looked at him for a long moment. It was an accessibility failure. Silence settled over the room. Grant folded his hands. You are an HVAC contractor. Today I am. Then perhaps you should stay within your expertise. Calder nodded toward Maren. She could not reach a table in a building your company owns. I did not need an engineering degree to notice. Maren said nothing. Her fingers rested motionless against the arm of her chair. Grant opened a folder and slid a document across the table. Whitlock has several properties requiring mechanical maintenance. A preferred vendor agreement could be very valuable to a small operation like yours. Calder did not touch it. How valuable? Grant smiled faintly, apparently sensing interest. Potentially 6 figures annually. Calder looked down at the document. 6 figures could replace the transmission in his van. It could stabilize the months when invoices arrived late and bills did not. It could put more money into Tessa's college account. For a single father who measured grocery trips against fuel costs, it was not a small offer. Maren watched his face carefully. And what do you want? Calder asked. Discretion, Grant replied. No social media, no conversations with reporters, no public discussion of what you believe you witnessed. Calder looked at Maren. Is that what you want? No, she said immediately. Grant exhaled. Maren, this is routine risk management. Calder picked up the pen. Grant relaxed. Calder placed it neatly across the unsigned contract. You are paying the wrong man. Grant's smile disappeared. Excuse me. Fix the building. Calder closed his toolbox. If you have money for my silence, you have money to make sure the next person can reach a table without asking strangers to rearrange the room. Grant stared at him. Do you understand what you are walking away from? Calder lifted the toolbox. Yes. 3 words. No anger. No performance. Just dignity. He turned toward Maren. The ventilation report will be emailed by 5. Then he left. The door clicked softly behind him. Grant shook his head. Pride is expensive. Maren continued staring at the unsigned contract. That was not pride. Then what was it? She remembered Calder asking permission before moving anything, refusing her money, and seeing a person where everyone else had seen a wheelchair. Now he had refused something far harder to refuse. Respect, Maren said quietly. Grant gave a dismissive laugh, but Maren was already reaching for her tablet. She opened the accessibility compliance records for the shopping center. Green checkmarks filled the screen. Every inspection passed. Every requirement approved. According to the reports, what happened Saturday should have been impossible. Maren looked up. Grant, who signed these? For the first time that morning, he did not answer. Ms. Whitlock, there is no way your chair fits through there. Tessa Hayes said it with the uncomplicated certainty only a 9-year-old could manage, and every adult around the conference table stopped talking. 3 days had passed since Calder walked away from Grant Bellamy's offer, and Maren had spent those days reviewing accessibility reports that claimed every Whitlock property met or exceeded company standards. The numbers looked perfect. The real world did not. That was why she had asked Calder to join an independent walkthrough of Whitlock's newest mixed-use development before its final inspection. He had resisted at first. I fix mechanical systems, he told her. Then look at the building the way you look at a broken system, Maren replied. That answer had been enough. On Thursday afternoon, Calder arrived wearing work boots and a faded blue shirt, with Tessa beside him because her after-school program had closed unexpectedly. Maren had simply smiled. She can come. Grant had not. Now 6 architects, 2 project managers, Grant, Maren, Calder, and Tessa stood inside a bright corridor overlooking the unfinished retail level. Rolled blueprints covered a temporary table. Fresh drywall dust hung faintly in the air. Somewhere below, a power drill buzzed and stopped. Tessa had wandered no farther than Calder allowed, following blue accessibility symbols taped along the floor. Then she found the problem. What do you mean? One architect asked. Tessa pointed toward the turn beside a decorative planter wall. That corner. The architect smiled politely. It meets the plan specifications. Tessa looked at Maren. Can you try it? Grant sighed. This is not a playground. Calder's eyes moved toward him. She asked a question. Maren rolled forward. The corridor narrowed near the planter, then turned sharply toward the elevator lobby. She slowed. One wheel approached the wall. She adjusted. Tried again. Stopped. The space technically existed, but the turn was awkward enough that ordinary foot traffic would make it nearly useless. Nobody spoke. Calder crouched beside the baseboard and pulled a tape measure from his belt. The metal blade clicked across the floor. 42 inches here, he said. The architect frowned. The approved drawing shows 48. Calder measured again. The floor does not. Grant stepped closer. Construction tolerances happen. Calder looked toward the planter wall. 6 inches is not a rounding error when somebody needs those 6 inches. Maren's gaze shifted to the blueprints. Show me the original revision. Papers rustled. A project manager searched through the set, then hesitated. This is the latest approved version. Who approved the change? Maren asked. No answer. Tessa stood beside her father, suddenly aware that the room had become serious. Calder examined the drawing, then the wall, then another measurement near the elevator. Maren. His voice had changed. Quiet. Focused. This is not the only one. They followed him down the corridor. A doorway was narrower than specified. A service counter extended several inches too far. An accessible route had been partially obstructed by a permanent display fixture added after the original plan. Small differences. Quiet differences. The kind most people walked past because they were not the people forced to notice them. Maren opened the compliance report on her tablet. Every item showed approved. Passed. Verified. Grant folded his arms. We can correct these before opening. That is not the question, Maren said. The question is how they passed. Calder looked at the report over her shoulder, then toward the measurements written on his notepad. Tessa tugged gently at his sleeve. Dad, yeah, kiddo. If the paper says there is enough room, but there is not enough room, does that mean somebody did not measure? Calder glanced at Maren. Her face had gone still. Maybe, he said. Maren scrolled to the authorization field at the bottom of the report. There, beneath pages of perfect green check marks, sat the same executive approval code on every disputed revision. Grant Bellamy. The building had not failed because nobody knew better. Someone had known exactly what the plans required. And somewhere between the blueprint and the finished wall, truth had been traded for convenience. Dad, why are people saying you planned it? Tessa's question came quietly across the kitchen table on Friday morning, and Calder stopped pouring coffee. His daughter sat in her school sweatshirt with a spoon resting untouched beside her cereal, staring at his phone where notifications had been appearing since before sunrise. Calder set the coffee pot down. Plan what? Tessa had turned the screen toward him. A short video from the food court had spread across local social media overnight. It showed Calder moving the table for Maren, but the beginning had been removed. The narrow aisle was missing. Maren's difficulty reaching the table was missing. Even Calder asking permission was missing. The clip began with him approaching her and ended with Maren watching him leave. Above it, a caption asked whether a local contractor had staged an encounter with billionaire Chief Executive Officer Maren Whitlock to gain access to her company. Calder watched it once. Then he locked the phone. That is not what happened. I know, Tessa said. You know? I know. Maren knows. That matters. Calder wanted those words to be enough. By 10 o'clock, they were not. His first customer called to postpone a maintenance contract. At 11:15, another canceled entirely. Shortly after noon, a property manager who had used Hayes Mechanical for 4 years sent a brief message saying they needed distance until the situation became clearer. No accusations. No shouting. Just doors closing quietly. That was how reputations could break. Not with one loud crash, but with a series of polite clicks. Calder spent the afternoon in his garage office beneath the hum of an old ceiling fan, staring at invoices, fuel receipts, and the calendar where he tracked Tessa's school activities in blue marker. He had survived lean months before. He could survive another. What he could not accept was seeing shame enter his daughter's eyes because strangers had turned kindness into calculation. At 3:40, Tessa climbed into the van after school and said nothing until they reached the first traffic light. A kid's mom called you a gold digger. Calder's hands tightened slightly around the steering wheel. What did you say? That she was wrong. Good. Then I wanted to say more. Calder glanced at her. Sometimes dignity means knowing when the truth does not need help from anger. Tessa looked out the window. It still hurts. Yeah, he said softly. It does. Across town, Maren sat inside her office watching the same edited video. Grant stood near the windows. This is exactly why I warned you, he said. Public perception becomes reality. Maren paused the video. Where did this footage come from? It is online. That is irrelevant. No, she replayed it. The camera angle came from above, steady and fixed. Not a customer's phone. Security footage. Whitlock property security footage. Maren looked up. Who authorized its release? Grant's silence lasted half a second too long. You are letting this become personal. It became personal when someone used company footage to smear a contractor who questioned your compliance records. Grant's expression hardened. Be careful what you imply. Maren's voice remained calm. I am done implying. 20 minutes later, Calder's phone rang. He saw Maren's name and let it ring twice before answering. Calder, I can correct this. Do not. She paused. You are losing clients. Then I will earn new ones. This happened because of my company. And if you publicly rescue me now, everyone will say the video was right. Silence stretched between them. Maren understood. Calder was not refusing help because he wanted to suffer. He was protecting the one thing Grant could not purchase, edit, or manufacture for him. His independence. Then what can I do? She asked. Calder looked through the windshield at Tessa waiting on the porch with her backpack. Find the truth, he said. Not for me. Find out why those reports were signed. Maren looked toward Grant's empty chair across her office. I intend to. Do not turn me into your miracle, Maren. Calder stood beside the workbench in his garage late Saturday afternoon, a wrench still in his hand and the smell of machine oil hanging beneath the wooden rafters. Rain tapped softly against the half-open door. Maren had arrived alone after spending most of the night reviewing internal records, vendor invoices, inspection revisions, and security access logs. Now a folder rested on her lap, thick enough to tell Calder she had found more than a mistake. I am not trying to save you, she said. You came here offering to restore every contract I lost. Because my company helped cause the damage. Then fix your company. 3 sentences. Sharp. Quiet. Final. Maren lowered her eyes for a moment. You make accepting help sound like surrender. Calder set the wrench down. No. I know the difference. But if Whitlock suddenly hands me contracts after that video, Grant gets exactly the story he wanted. Poor contractor meets billionaire. Billionaire rewards contractor. Nobody asks what happened inside those buildings. Rainwater whispered along the gutter outside. Maren opened the folder. Then let us ask. She showed him revised drawings, approval records, and internal emails. Several accessibility modifications had been rejected as unnecessary expenses. Other changes had been approved on paper but never completed. The same authorization trail appeared again and again. Grant Bellamy. Calder read silently. How many properties? I do not know yet. That means more than one. Yes. Calder closed the folder. Maren's voice softened. I spent years believing our reports because I thought standards protected people when good intentions failed. Then I could not reach a table in a building with my own name attached to it. Calder looked at her. There was no chief executive officer in her expression now. Just a woman confronting the distance between what she believed and what had been done under her authority. You did not build every wall, he said. But I signed off on the people who did. Then change what happens next. Maren nodded slowly. Help me. Calder hesitated. Not as a contractor looking for favors, she continued. Not as someone I owe. Walk the properties with me. Measure what the reports say is accessible. Show me what people stopped noticing. Calder looked toward the doorway, where Tessa sat on the porch beneath the awning, finishing a library book while listening to the rain. Why me? Maren followed his gaze. Because everyone in my company knows how to tell me what passes inspection. She looked back at him. You were the first person who showed me the difference between passing and working. Calder remained silent. Then Tessa appeared at the doorway. Are you two arguing? Discussing, Calder said. It sounded like arguing with manners. Maren laughed, and Calder almost smiled. Tessa looked at them both. Did you figure it out? Calder glanced at the folder. Maybe. Maren extended her hand, not with a contract, not with a check, but with a simple offer of partnership. Calder looked at it before shaking once. We find the truth, he said. All of it, Maren agreed. Outside, the rain began to ease. Nothing had been solved yet. Calder still had lost clients. Maren still had a company full of questions. But something had changed between them. She no longer needed him to rescue her. He no longer needed to refuse her power. They had finally found something stronger than charity and cleaner than pride. Respect. And for the first time, they were standing on the same side of it. And now we are taking building advice from a repairman? Grant Bellamy's voice carried across the boardroom with enough polish to disguise the insult, but not enough to hide it. 12 board members sat around the long walnut table on Monday morning while rain streaked the windows 30 floors above the city. Maren remained at the head of the table, calm and unreadable. Calder stood near the presentation screen in clean work clothes, holding no briefcase, no expensive portfolio, only a tape measure, a folder of field notes, and Tessa's tablet. Grant leaned back. This company employs architects, engineers, inspectors, and compliance specialists. Mr. Hayes repairs ventilation systems. Correct, Calder said. Then perhaps you can explain why you are here. Calder placed the tape measure on the table. The small metallic click seemed unusually loud. Because measurements do not care about job titles. Nobody laughed. Maren touched the control beside her tablet, and the screen illuminated with photographs from 7 Whitlock properties. Narrow passages, incorrect counter heights, permanent fixtures blocking approved routes. Each image appeared beside the original blueprint and the final compliance report. Every one of these locations passed, Maren said. Every one contained discrepancies after revisions approved through operations. Grant folded his arms. Construction changes happen. 7 times. Maren asked, across 4 projects? Silence. Calder opened his folder. The reports say 48 inches here. The finished corridor measures 42. This counter was approved at 34 inches. It was built higher. This route was listed as clear, but a permanent display occupies part of it. Grant shook his head. Minor deviations. Calder looked at him. Minor to whom? The room stilled. Maren brought up another file. Security access records appeared on the screen. There is also the matter of the food court footage. Grant's expression shifted. That has nothing to do with construction. It has everything to do with judgment, Maren replied. The internal log showed that the video had been accessed through an operations account shortly before the edited clip appeared online. Calder said nothing. He did not need to. Grant looked toward the board. You are allowing personal feelings to compromise corporate leadership. Maren's face remained composed. No, I allowed corporate convenience to compromise people. That ends today. Grant gave a short, humorless laugh and pointed toward Calder. Because he moved a table? Maren turned toward him. No, she advanced one final image. It showed the crowded food court from the original security recording. Maren blocked by furniture. Customers passing. Calder standing several feet away, asking before he touched anything. Then moving his own table. We are not taking advice from a repairman, Maren said quietly. We are listening to the only man in that room who noticed. No one moved. Grant opened his mouth, but Maren continued. He did not know my name. He did not know my company. He refused my money, refused your contract, and refused to let me repair his reputation with favors. He asked for one thing. Fix the building. She looked around the table. So we will. The board chair closed the folder before him. Pending an independent investigation, Mr. Bellamy's operational authority will be suspended. Grant stared across the table, but the argument had left the room. Calder reached for his tape measure. No victory smile. No celebration. Just quiet dignity. Maren met his eyes, and neither spoke. They did not need to. The truth had finally been given enough room to enter, and when it did, the entire boardroom went silent. Leave this one here. Maren's voice stopped Tessa just as the girl reached for the empty chair beside the table. 6 months had passed since the boardroom fell silent, and the food court looked almost familiar. Almost. The same afternoon sunlight poured through the high windows. The same coffee grinder hummed behind the corner counter. Families carried trays through the lunch crowd. Children negotiated over French fries, and shopping bags rested beside tired feet. But the aisles were wider now. Tables had been arranged with clear routes between them. Counters had been adjusted where necessary, and accessible seating was no longer pushed awkwardly to the edge as though inclusion belonged somewhere separate. Whitlock Urban Development had spent months reviewing every property it owned. The independent investigation had confirmed enough irregularities to permanently remove Grant Bellamy from his position, and Maren had ordered a company-wide accessibility audit that relied on more than paperwork. Real people tested real spaces. Calder had participated, but only under one condition. No favors. Maren had honored it. Hayes Mechanical received no gift contracts, no charity, no special treatment. Instead, Calder built a small accessibility field review team and competed openly for consulting work alongside larger firms. He did not become rich overnight. His old service Ben still complained on cold mornings. He still compared grocery prices and reminded Tessa to turn off lights she was not using. But his calendar was full again, his reputation had recovered, and his daughter no longer lowered her eyes when someone mentioned the video. The full security footage had eventually been released with Calder's permission. People saw what had really happened. More importantly, Calder stopped caring whether strangers believed he was a good man. Tessa already knew. That was enough. Now she stood beside the same place where everything had begun, holding a chair by its wooden back. But I was moving it so you have more room, she told Maren. Maren smiled. I already have enough room. Tessa looked around, testing the space with her eyes as though she had become a tiny inspector. You do. That was the idea. Calder arrived carrying 3 lemonades and set them on the table. What did I miss? Tessa is rearranging commercial property again. She charges by the hour now. Tessa grinned. Very expensive. Maren laughed, and Calder looked at her for half a second longer than he used to. Their relationship had changed quietly over the months. Coffee after inspections became dinner with Tessa. Dinner became Saturday afternoons. Nothing had been rushed. Neither of them needed rescuing. They had simply learned to make room for one another. Tessa started pulling the extra chair away again. Maren touched its edge. Leave this one here. Why? Maren looked at Calder. There was warmth in her eyes now, but also the same dignity he had noticed before he ever knew her last name. I think we need 3 seats. Calder understood. He sat beside her. Tessa climbed into the 3rd chair and raised her lemonade. No applause followed. No executives entered. No miracle arrived in a limousine. There were only 3 people sharing an ordinary table in a crowded American food court. And perhaps that was the greater miracle. Kindness had asked for nothing. Respect had demanded no recognition. Grace had simply returned when there was finally room for it. Sometimes a second chance does not announce itself loudly. Sometimes it pulls up a chair, sits beside you, and quietly stays.